The DNA test was supposed to humiliate Barack Obama. Instead, it lit the fuse that left Barron Trump exploding in front of millions. The room was a storm of flashing cameras, restless whispers, and that electric tension only a live broadcast could create. Barron stood at the podium, face flushed, knuckles white as he slammed the papers down so hard the microphones rattled. His voice cracked with fury as he waved the documents above his head, declaring he had proof that would end the myth of Barack Obama once and for all. For Barron, this was his coronation moment, the chance to inherit not just a family name, but a political empire. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for spectacle, waiting for Obama to falter. Some smirked, convinced the headlines had already been written. The younger Trump basked in the chaos, mistaking the noise for triumph. Every camera angle caught him sneering, smirking, feeding off the attention. He thought he was rewriting history with every word. But just a few feet away, Barack Obama stood, like a stone in a storm, calm, composed, holding his own set of papers, loosely in his hand. Eyes steady, posture unshaken. He didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. He let the silence build around him, let Barron's rage echo unchecked. And in that silence, the contrast was impossible to miss. Arrogance thrashing against dignity, noise crashing against truth. A murmur swept through the audience as Obama finally looked up, his expression almost sorrowful, as if watching a boy who didn't yet understand the weight of the stage he was standing on. The camera zoomed in, searching his face for fear or doubt, but finding only patience. That patience itself became its own weapon. Every second he stood silent. Barron's fury looked smaller, more desperate, less convincing. The DNA papers shook in Barron's hand, but his voice grew louder, desperate to fill the void Obama refused to fight for. He didn't realize that in trying to bury a man's legacy, he was digging his own credibility's grave. And then the pause. The moment when even the audience seemed to stop breathing, waiting for Obama to finally speak. But what Obama revealed next would not only silence the room, it would shock an entire nation. Long before Barron Trump slammed his fist on that podium, the stage had been set like a gladiator's arena. The challenge wasn't born in silence, it had been forged in weeks of noise. Headlines screamed of a showdown. Talk shows teased the confrontation, and social media buzzed with predictions of humiliation, victory, or disaster. It was billed as more than a debate. It was a generational clash, a test of legacy versus entitlement. Barron had positioned himself as the bold heir, the one who would do what his father couldn't: tear down the dignity of Barack Obama in full public view. He bragged that he had the ultimate evidence, proof that would dismantle the story America had told about its first black president. He mocked, he taunted, he painted the upcoming event as an execution rather than a debate. And people believed him, at least enough to watch. The media couldn't resist. Every major outlet hyped the spectacle, turning whispers into thunder. Cable news splashed countdown clocks on screens. Headlines blared, "Showdown of the Century," and tabloids printed images of the two men side by side like opposing prize-fighters. The hashtags trended days in advance: Dr. DNA Reckoning, Truth on Trial at Obama vs. Barron. For Barron, this wasn't about truth. It was about spotlight. For networks, it wasn't about clarity. It was about ratings. And for millions watching at home, it became something much bigger. It was about whether arrogance could finally dethrone dignity. Barron leaned into the hype like a celebrity entering a red carpet premiere. He traveled with entourages, posed for cameras, and rehearsed his lines as if preparing for a Broadway performance. His privilege wasn't hidden. It was flaunted. He sneered that Obama's story was manufactured, that the legacy of hope and change was nothing but paper-thin lies waiting to collapse. The crowd that adored him cheered, not because they had proof, but because they wanted a spectacle, wanted to see him win. Obama, by contrast, said little. No bluster, no theatrics. He agreed to the confrontation not because he needed to defend himself, but because he understood something Barron never could. That silence in the face of lies allows them to grow. For Obama, this wasn't about personal vindication. It was about truth itself, about showing the nation that dignity does not retreat when arrogance demands the stage. And so the arena was drawn. On one side, the loud, privileged heir basking in the glow of manufactured evidence. On the other, a man who had already weathered storms of doubt, racism, and conspiracy, and survived them all with composure. The stakes stretched beyond two men. They reached into living rooms, into communities, into the beating heart of what America chooses to value: noise or truth, spectacle or substance, arrogance or dignity. As the day arrived, the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Commentators whispered of a reckoning. Celebrities tweeted predictions. People canceled plans just to sit by their screens. The spectacle had grown too big to ignore, and Barron was certain it was his moment of triumph. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that the very stage he had demanded was about to collapse beneath him, because Barron had no idea the trap he had just walked into. Barron Trump had always lived in the glow of a gilded inheritance, yet he styled himself as a warrior for ordinary people. The contradiction was baked into his identity. Raised in penthouses with chandeliers overhead and bodyguards at his side, he spoke of hardship he had never known, of battles he had never fought. He insisted that he understood the struggles of the working class, even as chauffeurs opened his doors and private tutors shaped his days. For Barron, the theater of struggle was enough. He didn't need to live it. He only needed to perform it. That performance grew sharper as he aged. With every public appearance, he began to echo his father's cadence but sharpened it with youthful bravado. He learned how to sneer just right, how to roll his eyes at a question, how to jab a finger into the air as if punctuating divine truth. He carried himself not as someone earning trust, but as someone convinced it was owed to him. "I don't need to prove myself," he once said on a podcast, leaning back in his chair with practiced disdain. "My name already proved it." The quote went viral, not for its brilliance, but for its arrogance. Yet that arrogance didn't repel his followers. It magnetized them. To them, Barron was the bold heir who wouldn't soften edges, who wouldn't play by the polite rules that constrained others. He cast himself as a rebel despite being born into comfort most could never imagine. He wore tailored suits cut to look casual, sneakers that cost more than a month's rent, and still managed to posture as if he were the voice of the forgotten. In rallies, he declared himself a fighter against the frauds, even as critics noted that the only fraud he seemed to fight was the one in the mirror. It was this self-styled bravado that made the idea of the DNA test irresistible to him. He called it the silver bullet, the proof that would end Obama's aura of dignity once and for all. He promised his supporters a moment so shocking it would rewrite history books. "This isn't just politics," he crowed during an interview, chin tilted in smug confidence. "This is science, hard facts. And when I drop them, no one, not the fake news, not the elites, not even Obama, can stand against me." The crowd roared, but the conviction in his voice was born less from truth than from the thrill of performance. Still, Barron believed it, or at least he needed to believe it. After years of living under the shadow of a father both idolized and despised, Barron wanted his own victory, his own headline. He didn't want to be remembered merely as the son of Trump. He wanted to be the one who brought down Barack Obama. That fantasy was intoxicating. He pictured the headlines, the viral clips, the adoration. He imagined himself at the center of history, the heir who accomplished what his father never could. But behind the polished suits and the loud proclamations, there was a fragility Barron couldn't conceal. Those close to him whispered about his impatience, his quick temper, his need for constant validation. A misplaced question could send him into rants. A single skeptical look from a journalist could ignite insults. He mistook volume for strength and thought fury was proof of conviction. The louder he grew, the more he seemed to reveal the cracks beneath. On stage, those contradictions were on full display. He postured as a man of the people while his mannerisms betrayed entitlement. He spoke of truth, while clutching papers prepared by handlers, whose only goal was spectacle. And the more he waved those DNA results, the more the world saw not a warrior of facts, but a boy desperate for applause. The night of the confrontation, he was brimming with overconfidence. He strutted to the podium like a prizefighter entering the ring, grinning at cameras, whispering to aides as if already savoring victory. To him, the outcome was preordained. The DNA test would shatter Obama's dignity, erase the history books, and crown Barron as the victor of a generational war. He believed arrogance could carry him where truth could not. He believed entitlement could mask inexperience. He believed performance was enough to defeat patience. But the louder Barron roared, the more fragile his case became. Barack Obama had never been handed anything. Every step of his journey was marked by doubt, by whispers that he didn't belong, by doors that others tried to keep closed. Born in Hawaii to a Kenyan father and an American mother, he was raised with questions about identity stamped into his very existence. The world around him often told him he was too different, too unconventional, too unworthy of the stage he sought to stand upon. Yet time and again he met that doubt not with rage but with quiet resolve. Where Barron Trump was raised in towers of glass, Obama's early years were shaped by the modest homes of his grandparents, the lessons of a single mother, the realities of student loans and long hours of work. He remembered grocery bills that needed stretching, mornings when opportunity felt distant, and nights when the dream of a better tomorrow was only that, a dream. But he also remembered the values drilled into him: humility, service, and the belief that dignity was not inherited. It was earned. From the classrooms of Chicago, where he taught law students about constitutional rights, to the neighborhoods where he worked as a community organizer, Obama's path was carved not by entitlement, but by service. He sat in cramped church basements listening to families fight eviction, walked door to door urging neighbors to vote, and gave voice to those who felt invisible. In every space, he carried himself not as the loudest man in the room, but as the one willing to listen longest. That patience became his weapon. That dignity became his armor. And yet the doubts followed him. Pundits scoffed that he was too inexperienced, too professorial, too calm for the brutal arena of politics. Conspiracy theorists spun lies about his birthplace, his faith, even his very right to belong in the White House. Each accusation was a storm meant to drown him. But he never answered with fury. He steadied himself, spoke with measured tone, and let the truth outlast the noise. His greatest power was never a raised fist. It was the composure that refused to break. This is what made the contrast with Barron Trump so striking. On one side stood a young man who had inherited wealth, power, and a platform without lifting a finger. On the other stood Obama, who had clawed his way into history through persistence and intellect. Where Barron embodied entitlement, Obama embodied resilience. Where Barron flaunted arrogance, Obama radiated humility. The stage was more than a confrontation. It was a mirror of two Americas, one gilded by inheritance, the other forged by perseverance. Obama's story was also deeply personal. He often spoke of Michelle, of the sacrifices they made together, of raising daughters under the unrelenting glare of the public eye. He remembered how every mistake, every stumble was magnified, and yet they stood tall through it all. He remembered his mother's words about doing what was right, even when no one was watching. Those values shaped not just his presidency, but his very presence. So when he stood across from Barron that night, Obama was not just another politician defending his record. He was the sum of every doubt he had ever endured, every insult he had ever brushed aside, every moment of grace that had carried him through storms. He knew what it meant to be underestimated. He knew what it meant to be told he wasn't enough. And he knew how to dismantle arrogance without ever raising his voice. The nation had seen it before, in the debates where he calmly dismantled seasoned rivals, in the speeches where he lifted hope from despair. But tonight the stakes were sharper. This wasn't just about one man's dignity. It was about proving that truth, even under siege, still held power. For millions watching, Obama represented more than a politician. He represented the belief that resilience could triumph over privilege, that patience could withstand fury, that dignity could silence arrogance. As Barron roared and pounded his fist, Obama's composure reminded viewers of something timeless. Storms pass, but stone endures. He didn't rush to interrupt, didn't scramble to match Barron's noise with his own. He had prepared patiently, meticulously, not to destroy his opponent, but to reveal him. And on this night, Obama's preparation and patience would pay off in the most shocking way possible. The moment the cameras locked onto the stage, Barron lunged forward like a performer desperate for the spotlight. He waved the stack of DNA papers above his head as if they were sacred scripture, his voice booming through the hall with taunts designed not to inform, but to humiliate. "This is it, folks," he sneered, flashing a grin that looked more like a smirk. The so-called hero of hope. The man who lied his way into history. I've got the proof right here that he was never who he said he was. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some clapped and cheered, others murmured, skeptical. The energy in the room rippled like a tide searching for direction. And through it all, Obama remained still, hands folded loosely around his papers, eyes steady, face unreadable. That composure was infuriating to Barron. Every second Obama refused to flinch was another second Barron grew louder, angrier, more erratic. He jabbed a finger toward Obama, almost shouting now. "You fooled people for too long. Tonight the truth comes out. You can't hide behind speeches and smiles anymore. The science is clear. He slapped the papers on the podium with a thud that echoed across the hall. The microphones trembled at the force of his gestures. And yet when Obama finally tilted his head, the only thing he offered was a faint smile, measured, knowing, impossible to rattle. "Are you finished?" he asked softly, his tone so calm that it cut sharper than any insult. The audience let out a collective breath, some chuckling nervously, others applauding the restraint. That small response sent Barron into a spiral. He tried to interrupt, to talk over the calm voice, but the more he rushed, the more tangled his words became. His cheeks flushed red, his pacing frantic. He waved the papers again, sweat now gathering at his temples, the once proud air suddenly looking like a boy desperate to win a shouting match. Obama, by contrast, met the storm with grace. Each jab Barron hurled, he parried with quiet clarity. When Barron accused him of lies, Obama simply said, "The truth doesn't need volume." When Barron mocked his legacy, Obama replied, "Legacies aren't built in headlines. They're built in lives touched." Every line landed with the audience, drawing murmurs, nods, and bursts of applause. The restless energy in the room began to shift. Where once Barron had commanded the spectacle, now the spectacle was consuming him. He interrupted, he shouted, he gestured wildly. Obama, meanwhile, spoke with deliberate pauses, letting the silence carry more weight than words. The contrast became undeniable, one man unraveling, the other unshakable. By the halfway mark, even Barron's supporters grew uneasy. Some lowered their signs, others looked away as if embarrassed. The DNA papers, once held aloft like a weapon, now trembled slightly in his grip. He had come to bury Obama with noise, but all he had managed was to bury himself in desperation. Still, he refused to stop. "You can't run from this," he shouted, voice cracking. "The evidence is here. Everyone will see it. They'll see you're a fraud." His words bounced off the hall, but the conviction behind them had begun to waver. Obama's eyes never left him, calm, steady, almost pitying. He leaned forward just enough to let the microphone catch his next words. "If you truly believe that," he said, "you wouldn't need to scream." The audience erupted, some gasping, others cheering. The sound cresting into a wave Barron could not silence. And still Obama didn't rush, didn't gloat. He simply stood there, patience intact. As Barron sputtered and clawed at the moment slipping from his hands, the tension reached its breaking point. The room holding its breath, waiting for the blow that would finally decide the duel. Then came the moment, the counterstrike everyone had been waiting for. The hall was thick with tension, every eye flicking between Barron's trembling stack of papers and Obama's unreadable calm. For minutes Barron had ranted, his voice rising to fill every corner of the stage, his gestures frantic, his arrogance on display. He thought he was in control. He thought the cameras were his allies. But in truth, he had been dancing on a trap he couldn't see. And then, with the quiet grace of a man who has weathered storms, far greater than the tantrum of a privileged heir, Barack Obama moved. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted the papers he had been holding all along. They weren't flashy. They weren't waved around like props in a circus. They were tucked neatly in a folder, pulled out with the precision of someone who knew that the truth didn't need theatrics. It only needed time. The murmurs began instantly. The audience leaned in. Even the clicking of cameras slowed, as if the press itself sensed history was about to turn. Obama set the documents gently on the podium, smoothed them with his hand, and looked directly at Barron. "You've spoken a lot about science tonight," he said, voice low but firm. "So let's talk about science. Let's talk about facts, and let's talk about what's really in these tests." The silence in the hall was suffocating. Barron shifted, his bravado faltering for the first time as Obama held up the first page. The former president didn't shout, didn't sneer. He simply began to explain. "These results you're holding," Obama continued, nodding toward Barron's papers, "were doctored, manipulated, and I can prove it." He paused, letting the words settle like thunder after a lightning strike. A gasp rippled through the audience. Barron's eyes widened, his lips parting as if to object, but no sound came out. Obama lifted a second page, this one stamped with an independent lab seal. "Here are the actual test results, verified by 2 accredited institutions. Independent, transparent, nothing like the papers your camp manufactured." He held the document steady, letting the camera zoom in on the seal. The signatures, the undeniable weight of legitimacy. The audience murmured louder now, the tension breaking into disbelief. Journalists scrambled to snap photos, to capture the moment they knew would dominate headlines. Obama didn't rush. He didn't need to. He walked the audience through each detail, step by step. Each revelation another nail in the coffin of Barron's performance. "You claim these numbers prove fraud," Obama said, turning a page. "But when you look closely, the values are inconsistent. Lines are duplicated. Even the font gives it away. It's a forgery." He paused again, letting the words hang. "That's not science. That's not evidence. That's desperation." Every pause stretched into an eternity. Every sentence landed like a hammer. And with each reveal, the crowd grew bolder, gasps giving way to applause swelling into cheers. Barron tried to interrupt, but the noise drowned him out. He raised his voice, sputtering, "That's not true. It's fake." But his words cracked, his fury unraveling under the weight of undeniable fact. Obama didn't look rattled. He didn't even look angry. He looked steady, almost sorrowful, as though pitying the young man unraveling before him. He turned to the audience, his voice carrying not just authority but clarity. "For years I have been accused, doubted, insulted. I've seen every conspiracy theory thrown at me. And I've always trusted one thing, that truth has a way of outlasting noise." He set down the final page, eyes sweeping the hall. "Tonight you've all seen the difference. One side waves lies, the other side presents facts." Barron's face was crimson now, his hands shaking as he tried to raise his papers again, but the crowd wasn't listening anymore. The spell had broken. The heir to arrogance looked small, childlike, his voice drowned out by chants echoing through the hall, and then came the line. The one that would be replayed, quoted and remembered long after the night ended. Obama leaned into the microphone, his tone calm, deliberate, final. "The truth doesn't need a test. It stands on its own." The eruption was instant. The hall exploded with applause, cheers cascading from wall to wall, reporters leaping to their feet to capture the roar. It was a standing ovation, not for performance, but for dignity. The cameras captured it all. Obama, composed and steady, standing tall at the podium, while beside him Barron shrank, shoulders slumped, his so-called silver bullet exposed as nothing more than a blank. For Barron, it was devastation. His smirk had vanished, replaced by the vacant stare of a boy who had miscalculated the weight of truth. He mouthed protests, tried to shout over the noise, but the crowd no longer cared. The louder the applause grew, the smaller he became. His arrogance had promised a takedown. What he delivered instead was his own unraveling. For Obama, it was vindication, not the gloating kind, but the quiet victory of a man who never needed to scream to be heard. He didn't bask in the applause. He simply stood, allowing the truth to do what it always does, endure. That moment was the turning point. A single decisive blow that shifted the tide. The duel that had begun as a spectacle ended as a lesson. Noise fades. Arrogance collapses, but truth remains. The cameras captured Barron's face as he lowered his forged papers, his lips trembling, his eyes darting as if searching for an escape. But there was none. The trap he had set for another had closed around him instead. And as the chants of the crowd echoed like thunder, the story was no longer about his explosion. It was about Obama's unshakable poise, the calm strength that turned a storm into silence. But the real shock wasn't what happened inside that room, it was what exploded across the nation within hours. The moment Obama's final words, "The truth doesn't need a test. It stands on its own," rang out. The debate hall became ground zero for an explosion that spread far beyond its walls. Within minutes, clips of Barron's meltdown were clipped, uploaded, and unleashed into the digital bloodstream of social media. And once it hit the internet, there was no turning back. By midnight, hashtags were trending worldwide. Mic drop Obama, or DNA clown show, or truth over noise. Millions of tweets poured in, most mocking Barron's fiery collapse under the weight of calm, undeniable evidence. Memes hit Twitter, Instagram, TikTok photoshopped images of Barron clutching his fake papers. Captions like, "When your homework is copied and the teacher calls you out." Others showed Obama gently holding his documents, haloed like a saint with lines like, "Facts don't panic, lies do." The late-night hosts pounced within hours. By the next evening, monologues across every network carried the same rhythm, jokes at Barron's expense, admiration for Obama's composure. One quipped, "If this debate were a boxing match, Barron came with water balloons and Obama brought granite." Another joked, "Somewhere tonight, even printers are suing for defamation, after what those fake documents did to paper's reputation." Laughter roared across TV audiences as the humiliation deepened. But while comedy mocked the fall, punditry analyzed the quake. Cable news dissected the debate moment by moment, replaying the instant Obama revealed the real test results. Commentators noted how the audience gasped, how Barron's voice cracked, how Obama's calmness under pressure transformed the entire dynamic. One headline read, "Composure defeats chaos." Another simply, "End of credibility." Politicians who had once orbited Barron's camp suddenly fell silent. Some deleted tweets of support. Others scrambled to distance themselves. "I wasn't aware of the evidence manipulation," one senator claimed, his words dripping with backpedal. "If true, this is deeply concerning." The ripple effect was immediate. Alliances cracking, donors questioning, allies ghosting. Barron had promised them a spectacle of strength. Instead, he had delivered a masterclass in collapse. Meanwhile, Obama's stature soared. Clips of him, calmly dismantling the forged documents, went viral not just in the US, but globally. International outlets praised his poise. British papers called it a statesman's schooling of arrogance. European commentators highlighted the dignity of his performance. Across Africa and Asia, headlines emphasized how Obama had let facts, not fury, carry the night. For millions worldwide, the moment reaffirmed why his legacy had always been rooted not in volume, but in vision. And perhaps most importantly, ordinary people felt vindicated. For years, they had watched noise drown out reason, arrogance overshadow humility. But this time, the script flipped. The man who smirked, mocked, and waved lies had been crushed by a calm voice of truth. Comment sections were filled with catharsis. Finally, someone shut him down without raising his voice. This is what leadership looks like. Not shouting, but showing. That mic drop gave me chills. The emotional payoff was immense. Viewers who had grown weary of arrogance felt hope surge again. They saw that composure could still win in an age addicted to chaos. They saw that dignity could still shatter noise. And in that vindication, they felt not just entertained, but restored. Barron, meanwhile, became the internet's favorite cautionary tale. His red-faced meltdown was gifed, looped, and mocked endlessly. One viral TikTok remixed his sputtering denials into a dance track. Another stitched his furious gestures next to Obama's calm smirk, captioned, "Noise versus truth." His humiliation was immortalized in digital ink, impossible to erase. For Obama, it wasn't about the memes or the trending tags. It was about something deeper, reminding people that facts still mattered. That composure wasn't weakness, that humility was its own form of power. And that reminder struck chords far beyond politics. Teachers shared the clip in classrooms. Motivational speakers quoted his line in seminars. Parents replayed the moment for their children as an example of what it means to stay grounded when attacked. The nation had witnessed not just a takedown, but a demonstration, a living lesson that arrogance, no matter how loud, eventually collapses when faced with truth. And as the digital storm swirled, one thing was clear: Obama hadn't just won the debate. He had redefined it. Cliffhanger. Yet the most powerful part of the story wasn't the takedown. It was the lesson that followed. As the storm of memes, headlines, and hashtags continued to rage, Obama himself offered the calm after the quake. In interviews and quiet remarks afterward, he didn't gloat. He didn't dance on Barron's embarrassment. He reframed it. To him, the night wasn't about proving one man wrong or one man right. It wasn't about DNA, politics, or the theater of public spectacle. It was about something much larger. "It's not about me," he said softly in one post-debate reflection. "It's about what kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be a place where arrogance replaces truth? Or a place where truth speaks louder than noise?" And in those words, the lesson crystallized. The spectacle had given the world a front-row seat to the collapse of arrogance. Barron had strutted into that room with paper-thin lies and the confidence of inherited privilege. He believed volume could drown out reason. That mockery could rattle dignity. That truth was fragile enough to be bent. But in that same room, Obama showed that none of that noise could erase what was real. The truth didn't shout. It didn't rage. It simply stood. That's why the moment carried weight far beyond politics. Viewers across the country, students, workers, parents, saw themselves in it. Because everyone knows what it's like to face arrogance in their own lives. The boss who sneers at effort. The classmate who brags louder than they work. The neighbor who carries themselves as though entitlement makes them untouchable. We've all seen versions of Barron before, and too often those voices seem to dominate. But this moment reminded people that arrogance is temporary. Privilege can inflate someone's ego. but it can't protect them from reality forever. When tested, arrogance cracks. When pressed, it crumbles. Truth, on the other hand, endures, not because it's loud, but because it doesn't need to bend. Obama's performance was less a debate tactic than a human lesson. His calmness under attack reminded us that dignity is not weakness, it's strength, disguised as patience. His refusal to shout back showed that silence, timing, and composure can sometimes cut sharper than the fiercest insults. And his final words, "The truth doesn't need a test. It stands on its own," captured something universal. Truth does not beg for validation. It exists whether or not arrogance acknowledges it. That's why history remembers figures like him, not because they yell the loudest, but because they speak in ways that outlast the noise. The real victory of that night wasn't Obama's rebuttal, it was the proof that integrity still has a place in public life, even in a world obsessed with viral moments and chaos. And for every person watching, the takeaway was clear. You don't need inherited privilege to matter. You don't need arrogance to be heard. What you need is consistency, patience, and the courage to let truth carry you, even when lies roar louder. Arrogance fades, truth endures. As Obama himself might have put it, history doesn't remember the loudest voice in the room. It remembers the one that spoke truth with dignity. That is the lesson and the legacy of that unforgettable night. And so, the night that began with Barron slamming his fist on a podium ended with his credibility in ruins. The DNA test he thought would humiliate Barack Obama became the spark that revealed his own arrogance. And Obama's calm dismantling of lies became the moment that still echoes around the world. Barron exploded, but the truth revealed by Obama still echoes. That is the heart of this story. Not the spectacle, not the shouting, not the meltdown, but the reminder that dignity always outlasts noise. Obama didn't need to roar, he didn't need to mock, he didn't need to bend the facts. He simply let the truth do what truth always does, stand firm, unshaken, undeniable. And that's why this moment matters for more than politics. It's a lesson about life. When arrogance pushes, when entitlement shouts, when lies get dressed up as evidence, the strongest response isn't rage. It's composure. It's clarity. It's the steady voice that outlasts the chaos. That's the power of dignity, and that's why it always wins. If you believe in truth over noise, if you believe in integrity over arrogance, then join this community. Share this story, subscribe for more. Because the more we amplify dignity, the louder it becomes until even the loudest explosions can't drown it out. And remember this, explosions fade, noise fades. But the truth never does.